So I was going through some stories the other day about people's utility bills. And guys, I want to tell you, I almost couldn't believe what I was reading. Like I had to read it twice. There's a woman in Missouri who opened her electric bill recently, and it came in at $830, okay? And she was actually relieved. She was relieved because the previous month her bill was $130. Over $1,000 for electricity in a regular house. And to put that in perspective, that is more than her mortgage payment. Her electric bill is now bigger than her mortgage. And I kept reading and I found another family, $560 in June, $650 in July. And in just 3 months, they spent over $2,000 just on electricity. And people are calling their utility companies because they think there has been some kind of mistake. There has to be an error, right? And the utility company is just saying, no, that's correct. That's exactly what you owe, which is just wild to me. And that's when it really hit me. Because this is not a story about people who made bad financial decisions. This is not about people who overspent or lived beyond their means. The woman in Missouri with the $830 electric bill, she did everything right. She has a modest house, she has a mortgage, she went to work every day and paid her bills on time and built a middle-class life. And now her electric bill is bigger than her mortgage payment. And I just kept thinking, when did this happen? Like at what point did the middle-class life that people were promised become completely unaffordable? That's what I want to talk about today, because I think the collapse of middle-class life in America is the biggest story that isn't being told right now. And I want to go through what is actually causing this, what the warning signs look like, and what middle-class families can actually do about it. So stick around because we have a lot to cover. But before I get into all of that, I just want to say, if any of this sounds familiar to your own situation, drop it in the comments below. Because what I keep hearing from people is that the middle-class life that everyone was promised is quietly disappearing. And the more we talk about it, the better. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about what is actually going on here. Because the utility bill thing, that's a symptom. What I want to get into is the disease. Why is middle-class life becoming impossible to sustain right now? And the short answer is inflation. But here's the thing that I don't think gets talked about enough. Inflation doesn't hit everybody the same way. Wealthy people actually do okay during inflation, because they own stuff. Real estate goes up, stocks go up. Their assets inflate right along with everything else. And people on the lower end of the income scale, they're hurting too, don't get me wrong. But the middle class, the people with a mortgage and a car payment and insurance and kids and a retirement account they're trying to build, they're the ones sitting right in the blast zone because they need their income to keep up with prices, and their income is not keeping up. And it's not just inflation. You've got taxes going up at every level: federal, state, local, property taxes. You've got interest rates that have stayed elevated for way longer than most people expected. You've got a national debt that just keeps going up with no real plan to deal with it. And wages. Wages are basically going nowhere for most middle-class workers right now. Like the raises are happening, but they're not keeping pace with what things actually cost. And then there's the AI situation, which honestly I think is going to be one of the defining economic stories of the next few years for the middle class specifically. Because here's what a lot of people don't realize. The jobs that AI is coming for first are not the minimum wage jobs at the bottom, and they're not the executive jobs at the top. They're the middle, the stable professional jobs that middle-class people spent years and a lot of student loan money getting qualified for. Accounting, writing, analysis, customer service management, those are the jobs that are starting to disappear, and that's the income the middle class runs on. So you put all of that together, and the message it sends to the average middle-class person is pretty brutal. If you're not already wealthy right now, the system is kind of stacked against you. And I hate to say that because it sounds really bleak, but I think it's just an honest read of where things are in 2026. Think about this for a second. When our parents' generation was growing up, $1 million meant you were set. That was the finish line. You get to $1 million, you retire, you never stress about money again. But most middle-class people watching this know that $1 million today does not go anywhere near where it went 30 years ago. The finish line got moved. Way, way back. And most people only figured that out once they got close enough to see it was gone. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk recently about whether the Fed is going to cut interest rates. And I know a lot of middle-class people are kind of hoping for that. Like, lower rates would mean cheaper mortgages, cheaper car loans, cheaper credit card debt. And look, I get why people want that. I really do. When you're getting squeezed from every direction, anything that sounds like relief sounds good. But here's the problem. Inflation has actually been going up in the most recent readings. So think about what it means to cut rates right now, at the exact moment inflation is rising again. Cutting rates when inflation is going up is basically pouring gasoline on a fire that hasn't gone out yet. It's almost a guarantee that inflation gets worse, not better. Worse. And I know there are some really smart economists who think that housing costs coming down will be enough to pull overall inflation lower. And I respect that take. I just don't agree with it. There are too many other things going up too fast right now. The housing relief is just not going to outweigh everything else that's rising. That's just my honest read on it. But whoever ends up being wrong here, whether it's me or the optimists, you know who pays the price either way if inflation gets worse? The middle class. It is always the middle class that takes the hardest hit from inflation. Every single time. That's just how it works. And here's where it gets really personal for middle class families. It's not just the big stuff like the mortgage or the rent. It's everything else that has quietly become unaffordable. Water bills. We are talking about $700 per month water bills on regular middle-class homes. Not mansions, not large properties, average houses in average neighborhoods. The kind of person who owns a modest house owns it because that's what they can afford. They did not budget for a $700 water bill on top of everything else. And when you add up all of the utilities together, electric, water, gas, sewer, trash, recycling, a middle-class household can now face total monthly utility costs that compete with or flat out beat the mortgage payment. The entire financial structure of a middle-class life was built around different numbers than this. Those numbers don't exist anymore, and nobody sent out a notice that they had changed. So when people ask me why the middle class is struggling right now, I tell them, look at the bills. Just look at the bills. Everything else flows from there. So let me show you where the utility bill crisis is actually leading. Because it's not just that the bills are high, it's what people are doing about it. And this is where things get really interesting. What's happening is that middle-class families are starting to triage their payments. You know, like they're sitting there every month going, okay, what absolutely has to get paid right now, and what can I push back? And people have figured out pretty quickly which bills you can delay without immediate consequences. Medical bills go first because nothing happens right away if you don't pay them. Mortgage and rent payments get delayed, and this sounds crazy, but it can actually take months to get evicted and over a year to get foreclosed on if you own a house. Credit cards get skipped because you've got years before anything really serious happens legally. So people are paying the ones they absolutely have to and letting the rest wait. And the delinquency data confirms this, guys. Right now, 55% of household bills in America are being paid on time, 30% are being paid late, and 15% are just not getting paid at all. So nearly half of all financial obligations that American households are carrying are either late or completely unpaid right now. Nearly half. And these are not deadbeats. These are middle-class families who have never missed a payment in their lives until recently. And interestingly, the creditors have kind of gone quiet about it. Like they're not chasing people as aggressively as you might expect. Probably because they know people genuinely don't have the capacity to pay right now, and aggressive collections would just yield nothing. The ripple effects of all this are everywhere too. There are stories about handymen with great reviews and years of solid experience going 14 straight days without a single job inquiry. Because middle-class homeowners who would normally just call somebody to fix something are now figuring it out themselves. When you've got more time than money, You stop paying other people to do things. And home inspection companies, these are the companies that only really have business when people are buying and selling homes. They are reportedly cold calling old clients just asking for referrals, begging for work. Because home sales right now are near their lowest level in 30 to 40 years. The middle class has basically stopped participating in the housing market, and a lot of the industries that were built around middle-class homeownership are drying up right along with it. There are people in the mortgage industry saying their loan volume right now is a fraction of what it was a few years ago. People who have been in the business for 15, 17 years saying they have never seen it this slow. All right, I want to walk you through some economic signals that I think are really important right now, but that most people have never heard of, because these are the things that tell you what's actually happening with middle-class spending before the official data even catches up. First one is cardboard boxes. I know that sounds random, but stay with me here. Cardboard boxes are basically the skeleton of the middle-class consumer economy. Every time someone orders something online or a retailer stocks their shelves, there are cardboard boxes involved. So when box production goes down, it means retailers are expecting middle-class consumers to pull back on buying. And right now, cardboard box production is down. Manufacturers have already shut down multiple factories this year and are cutting capacity at the ones still running. The signal from the industry is that middle-class demand is expected to contract. That's not a small thing. And the official consumer spending number looks technically positive as of early 2026. But here's what you need to know about that number. The top 10% of earners in this country are right now responsible for 50% of all consumer spending. Half. So when the headline says consumer spending is up, that's almost entirely a story about what wealthy people are doing. The middle-class share of consumer spending is shrinking. And what rich people are buying tells you nothing about what's happening to everyone else. Second thing, and I love this one because it's so real, Hamburger Helper sales are up significantly this year. Eagle Foods, the company that makes it, confirmed the jump. And for anybody who doesn't know, Hamburger Helper is basically a packaged pasta thing that you combine with ground beef to stretch it into a cheap filling meal. And it is genuinely having its biggest commercial moment in years. And that is not because it suddenly got delicious. You know what I mean? That is middle-class families stretching grocery budgets in ways they haven't had to in a very long time. Frozen pizza sales are also up. Middle-income shoppers are switching over to Aldi and Walmart. The secondhand clothing app ThredUp reported a 16% jump in sales in the second quarter alone. People are selling stuff they own to get extra cash and buying used instead of new. That is the middle class adapting to a reality that is significantly tighter than it was a few years ago. Third signal is commercial semi-truck orders, which have dropped sharply. These are the big trucks that physically move goods around the country. And historically, when semi-truck orders fall steeply, a recession tends to follow. That drop is happening right now, with a 25% tariff on imported trucks making it even worse on top of the underlying demand weakness. Okay, let me give you one more signal, and then I want to get into something that I think is the scariest part of all of this. The job quit rate has hit its lowest level since 2020. The percentage of workers voluntarily leaving their jobs is basically as low as it has been since the economy was shut down. And this is a really big deal for middle-class workers specifically. Because here's the thing, job switching is literally how the middle class gets raises. That's the mechanism. You stay at the same company for too long, your pay goes stale. You become easier to replace, not harder. The people who keep pushing their income up are the ones willing to go out to the market and compete for something better. And right now, middle-class workers are completely frozen in place because they have seen what happens to people who leave a job in this market and can't find an equivalent one. That fear is completely rational, but the consequence is that middle-class wages are going to stagnate even harder going forward. Now here's the one that really concerns me the most out of everything I've covered today. Home equity loan originations jumped 12% in the first quarter of this year. Middle-class homeowners are borrowing against their homes at an accelerating rate, and about half of those are cash-out refinances. People literally pulling money out of the equity they spent decades building. Now, the official story people give for doing this is home renovations. But look, a large percentage of these are really debt consolidation. People who have maxed out their credit cards and their personal loans are now reaching into the house, the one major asset they spent 20 or 30 years building just to stay afloat. And here's what gets me about this. The average cash-out refinance right now adds about $500 a month to the mortgage payment. Okay? Who voluntarily adds $500 a month to their housing costs? Someone who has genuinely run out of every other option. Because if they could absorb an extra $500 a month, they would have had that money sitting in savings already. This is not really a financial decision. This is desperation dressed up as a financial decision. The middle-class home was supposed to be the foundation, the thing you spend 30 years building and then retire into, the asset that represents everything you worked for, and people are now burning through that foundation just to cover the gap between what they earn and what everything costs right now. That's where we are. So JP Morgan put out this cost of living survey recently that I think really captures what's going on right now. They call it the K-shaped economy. And the idea is pretty simple. The wealthy are being pulled upward while the middle class and lower income groups are getting pushed down. The two lines are literally moving in opposite directions at the same time. And the survey asked people to rate the economy from 1 to 10. High-income people averaged 6.2 out of 10, which even for the people who are supposed to be doing well right now, that is not a vote of confidence. That's barely a passing grade. And middle and lower income people rated it 4.4 out of 10. The overall average across everybody was 4.9 out of 10. The average American rates the current economy below 5 out of 10. And that number includes all the wealthy people pulling the average up. They also asked whether covering monthly bills had become easier than 12 months ago. About 60% of high earners said yes. Among middle-class and lower-income households, only 30% said the same. And the only way your bills get easier to cover is if your income went up significantly, because prices definitely didn't go down. So the 30% of middle-class people saying things got easier, those are the lucky ones who got a real raise. The other 70% are falling further behind every single month. Now, I want to get into what middle-class Americans are actually saying is hitting them hardest right now. Because this is showing up everywhere. Social media, forums, news comment sections, and it gives you a really honest picture of where middle-class life is in 2026. Number one by a mile is utility bills. Electric and water bills have gone up so far and so fast that people who have never had payment trouble in their lives are now in genuine crisis. A monthly electric bill bigger than a mortgage, which is something we talked about at the top of this video, would have sounded completely insane 3 years ago. Now it's real. Number two is the overall cost of living. And you know what I keep seeing people say? Stop calling it inflation. Because inflation sounds like a policy condition with a policy solution somewhere down the line. What middle-class families are actually experiencing is that everything costs more and their pay doesn't move. That's not a market fluctuation. That's an impossible math problem showing up in their bank account every single month with no end in sight. Number three is housing. People are saying they need 2 or even 3 incomes just to cover a mortgage or rent in most markets now. Let me keep going through what people are actually dealing with right now because I think this stuff is really important. There's a story going around that really stuck with me. A house that sold in 2022 is already in foreclosure. The family that bought it needed 3 adult incomes on the mortgage application just to qualify, and then one of those adults passed away, and that one lost income brought the whole thing crashing down. 1 income, gone, and the house is gone too. That is how thin the margin is for middle-class families trying to stay housed right now. Number 4 is wages and job insecurity. Functional unemployment is near 25% in some parts of this country right now. Middle-class professionals who lose a job are finding out pretty quickly that there is no equivalent role waiting for them on the other side. Number 5 is debt. You know, there are people out there working 60 hours a week in EMS, driving a beat-up car, living in a modest home, and they are still one medical emergency away from complete financial collapse. Not because they made bad choices, because the cost of maintaining a basic middle-class life has just outpaced what a middle-class income can actually support. That is not a personal failure, that is a system failure. And I think it's important to say that out loud. A lot of people are also saying the American dream is dead right now. And look, I kinda get that, I really do. But I think instead of calling it dead, the definition just has to change. The old version, own a home, pay it off, retire comfortably, that version is out of reach for a lot of middle-class people right now. And that's just true. But the new version, financial freedom, enough to cover your life without stress, enough to actually stop working someday on your own terms, that is still achievable. It just looks different than what our parents were told to aim for. And then there's the mental health piece of this that I think really doesn't get talked about enough. The isolation, the anxiety, the burnout. Middle-class people aren't just financially exhausted right now, they're emotionally depleted too. Like there's this constant low-level stress of knowing that you're doing everything right and still falling behind. And that takes a real toll on people over time. Okay, now let me show you the stock market piece of this, because I think it's one of the most important and honestly one of the most frustrating parts of the whole story. Here's something that genuinely confuses and frustrates a lot of middle-class people right now. The stock market keeps hitting all-time highs. If the middle class is collapsing, why does the market look fine? And the answer is actually pretty dark when you think about it. We now live in a world where laying off middle-class workers is good news for Wall Street. Like when a big company announces it's cutting thousands of jobs, a lot of them solid middle-class professional positions, the stock price usually goes up because the market reads that as cost reduction. Fewer salaries means wider margins. Wider margins means higher earnings. Higher earnings means a higher stock price. The elimination of middle-class jobs is being actively rewarded by capital markets right now. And the AI thing has made this so much worse. Every announcement about replacing a floor of middle-class knowledge workers with software, the stock goes up. But here's what I don't think people on Wall Street are fully reckoning with. The middle class is the customer base. The same people being pushed out of middle-class income are the same people who are buying the products and sustaining the revenue that holds those stock prices up. When the middle class can't afford to participate in the consumer economy anymore, there's eventually nobody left to buy anything. The middle class has been living on debt to keep spending, credit cards, buy now, pay later, personal loans, home equity. But debt has a ceiling, and that ceiling is getting close. Now I want to show you one more thing, and then I'll get into what you can actually do about all of this. When you look at the current inflation data, the PCE measure the Fed uses, and you put it next to what happened to inflation in the 1970s, the shapes are almost identical. Back then, inflation surged, pulled back, then climbed past 10%, fell to around 6%, then surged back toward 10% again. That era is defined by one word: stagflation, inflation plus stagnant economic growth, devastating for middle-class families. And the current PCE chart is tracking that same arc right now. The 70s version was driven by an oil crisis. What we have today is an energy crisis of a different kind. AI data centers are creating electricity demand the grid was not built for. Electricity prices have been outpacing inflation since 2022, and that is projected to continue through at least the end of 2026. Middle-class households have already seen electric bills go up 30 to 50% over the past couple of years. So look, I want to leave you with something practical, because doom without a plan is not useful. I'm not a prepper, but I am a serious saver, and I live significantly below my means. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is your protection. Build a real emergency fund. Own some real assets. Gold and silver have held value through every inflationary period in history and don't carry debt on things that lose value. The middle-class households that came through 2008 in the best shape were the ones who made adjustments while there was still room to move. That window is still open right now. Drop a comment and tell me what is hitting your household the hardest right now. Is it the utility bills, groceries, the job market, housing? I want to know. And if this video gave you something useful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there is something new in this story almost every single day.